Hello everybody, my name is Chase here, and I've just learned that I have a few days left to live. Quite sad indeed. I mean, everyone's gotta go eventually, but it just makes me sad because it means that I can't complete my very extensive bucket list. Huh.
Zelda in 3D? That's impossible. What, is Sonic just gonna turn into a werewolf now? A Link to the Past was one of the best-selling games on the Super Nintendo, with over 4.6 million copies sold worldwide and was beloved by critics and fans alike. So long story short, it was a huge success for Nintendo. But for the next installment in the series, Zelda would soon find its new home in the third dimension on the Nintendo 64 in 1998 with The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The game I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for. This was the first Zelda game I ever played back in around 2016. I played it, couldn't beat Goma, and promptly gave up.
I was such a smart kid.
But before we can get into the game proper, let's get into its history a bit. Ocarina of Time started its development in 1995 alongside Super Mario 64 by Nintendo EAD, and was shown at Space World the same year under the name Zelda 64. It was originally going to be released for the Nintendo 64 disk drive, but that thing flopped so hard that it was retooled to just be a standard cartridge game, and we all breathed a sigh of relief that we didn't have to buy this hunk of junk to play it. This game would take an incredible amount of effort to get right due to the game being the first of its kind in a lot of ways. There wasn't really anything to go off of while making it. It actually was originally going to be in first person, and I'm so curious about how that would have turned out if they kept that direction. But in the end, the effort paid off, as it was not only the best-selling game of 1998, but it was the fourth best-selling game on the system and won countless awards for its innovation in the industry. For many years, it was allotted as being one of the greatest games, if not the greatest game of all time. But in return, it gave the game what I like to call Final Fantasy VII syndrome, where the game's excessive popularity made it cool to shit on in the recent years.
But now that we can judge the game in hindsight, I think it's time to look back to make sure that Ocarina of Time still holds up in a post-Breath of the Wild world. I mean, what the hell, I got like 20 minutes left.
The game begins in the Kokiri Forest, a small village inhabited by the race known as the Kokiri. One of them, of course, being our good old inexpressive piece of wood, Link, who is barely 9 years old in this game. Talk about starting them young. Link is summoned by the Great Deku Tree, who is kind of the elder of the village, to come meet with him. It is not a great day for this tree, as he tells Link that he has been cursed, and he needs him to enter him and kill the monsters inside to break the curse. After Link vanquishes the boss, the Deku Tree then reveals his fate was sealed from the start and that he was going to die anyway no matter the outcome.
But what the hell did I just risk my life for?
He then tells Link he must venture to Hyrule Castle and meet with the Princess of Destiny to continue on his quest. So after the Deku Tree dies and being accused of murder, yeah, fuck you too, Mido. Link travels to Hyrule Castle and meets Princess Zelda, who believes that a servant of the king named Ganondorf is planning on entering the Sacred Realm and stealing the Triforce to take over Hyrule, and that Link must collect 3 spiritual stones and open the Door of Time if he wishes to prevent that from happening. So after almost getting a big Goron hug and getting engaged to this fish lady, Link receives all 3 spiritual stones and returns to Hyrule Castle, where he sees Zelda and her caretaker Impa fleeing from the castle being pursued by the big cheese himself. Link tries to fight Ganondorf, but he goes down in one attack.
Come on, kid, what are you, 9? Oh, wait.
He then uses the 3 stones to open the Door of Time, revealing the Master Sword. But it seems that Ganondorf has been following Link this entire time, and pulling out the sword has opened the door to the Sacred Realm and allowed Ganondorf to steal the Triforce with no resistance. Not only that, but pulling out the Master Sword has also put Link into a coma for 7 years, as Link was too young to be the hero of time. Jesus, talk about a lose-lose. Link, who is now 7 years older, is awakened by this sage named Raoul, and explains how Link fucked up the entire world, and that in order to fix it, he must awaken the 7 sages to reside in the 5 different dungeons, as they are the key to defeating Ganondorf, who is now the king of evil.
Awakening 7 sages after pulling out the Master Sword that took 3 MacGuffins to get? Now where have I heard that before?
Overall, this story is really well told. On the surface, it seems really similar to the story in A Link to the Past, and it is. But I think Ocarina of Time improves on it in a lot of major ways. And now I will explain why, because I feel like my credibility was just too high before now.
See, I'm much more comfortable.
The story in A Link to the Past, while a solid improvement over the first two games, was still only an excuse for the game to happen. Like, it gets the job done and was a solid improvement over its older brothers, but it's still a 90s video game plot. While Ocarina of Time uses its story and narrative to immerse you in its world and its characters, and make the journey more interesting and memorable. One of the most memorable moments in video games for me is when Link steps out of the Temple of Time after 7 years to see the ruined Hyrule Castle town. It's so jarring and really hits home how much you fucked up. You really get to see how much Ganondorf's rule has affected the world. Death Mountain is empty, Zora's domain is frozen over, Lon Run Ranch is under new ownership, and your home village is infested with monsters, forcing the Kokiri into the Lost Woods. The world and characters are just so much more interesting than they were in A Link to the Past. The maidens were just faceless nobodies who didn't even have names, while the sages are friends you made as a child and are now catching up with. It makes you care for them and gives you a reason to want to save them, other than the fact that you have to if you want to see the credits roll.
And I don't mean to shit on A Link to the Past. I mean, my video on it was almost nothing but nice things, but the reason I'm doing this now is because I didn't feel like it was fair to criticize A Link to the Past for stuff that future games improved on.
And I mean, there are some missed opportunities. I know Link is supposed to be the player character, but it still would have been nice to see how he feels about some of the situations he's put in to make him feel like less of a bland character, since most of the game focuses on him and his journey. And I also would have liked to see him more of a connection with the other Kokiri children outside of just Saria. We get a little bit of that. They call him the boy without a fairy, I'm guessing to mock him, so I guess they don't like him? I just would have liked a bit more to figure out what kind of relationship Link had before leaving on his quest. There's also Sheik, who pops up after the 7-year time jump. They are basically a ninja who help Link by teaching him warping songs and giving him some pretty introspective speeches about time. But right before the final dungeon, Sheik is revealed to be spoiler! Princess Zelda the whole time. And I think this is a great twist that I didn't see coming on my first playthrough. But it does make me wish Zelda did more in the story as Sheik. There's a moment before the Shadow Temple where you think they're gonna team up, but Sheik just kinda gets thrown around and that's about it. I just would've liked more of her to show how badass Princess Zelda could be. I mean, she's already a ninja. Like, if she can do all this shit as Sheik, why can't she do this as Zelda? And then there's Navi, or Navi, as in navigation. One of the most hated video game characters of all time. To be honest, I don't even think she's that annoying. Maybe a bit loud.
Hello? Look! Hey! Listen! Watch out!
The only time she annoys me is when she's telling me to progress in the story when I'm doing side quests. But other than that, my only real issue with her is she's a pretty boring character, as she's practically used as GPS lock-on bitch for most of the game. And it's a shame because it makes this moment during the final boss where she comes back to help you ring a little hollow, because I just didn't really get that attached to her. But overall, she's pretty inoffensive.
Now, like I always do, we'll talk more about the story when I summarize the ending, but for now, I want to talk about how well Ocarina of Time took the formula from A Link to the Past and shifted it into the third dimension. Yeah, I still got some time.
For starters, let's talk about the combat. After adding the third axis, swinging the sword wouldn't be so easy, as there's so much more space to compensate for now. If only there was a way to focus on one enemy at a time and always have the camera on them with the push of a button! Introducing Z-targeting, or lock-on targeting, whatever butters your biscuit. This shit was revolutionary back when this game came out. Think of how many third-person action games have a mechanic like this to this day. And it still works pretty damn well. It's just sometimes you can't pick a goddamn target when there's more than 3 enemies on the screen. It's a little finicky, but for being the first of its kind, it works as well as you need it to. It does help that this game isn't insanely difficult. There's a few enemies that might give you trouble, like Stalfos, or my favorite enemy to fight, Iron Knuckles. These boys hit like bulldozers, but they're always interesting to engage with. It gets your blood pumping. And I like how they can smash pillars for extra hearts. But some fights are just terrifying. What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? This well needs to be nuked!
But hey, this ain't no Dark Souls. Zelda is about that world and exploration, so how's that?
One of the biggest slights I've seen against this game is Hyrule Field. It serves as a hub that connects all the major areas of the game. It's very big, and there's not a lot of stuff to do in it other than fight skeleton enemies that come out at night, hunting, or finding hidden caves in the ground. So yeah, I do agree that there could have been more to do in it, but I still don't really mind it that much. The only time it really bothers me is when you're young Link, because he really doesn't have a way to travel faster other than rolling. Adult Link has Epona, which makes traveling much easier and more fun, but I don't really know why young Link doesn't have something like that. It does help that all the areas that young Link needs to progress are on the right side of the map, so you really only need to travel to the other side if you're doing side quests. Speaking of which, let's talk about the side quests. There's only a handful of them, and most of them are just alright. Heart Piece collecting is back from A Link to the Past, and they are just as fun to find and collect as they were in the last game. But just like before, getting some of them
suck.
The main offenders being the ones where you have to play the songs on your ocarina. Okay, so I'm playing this game on the Wii U Virtual Console with the classic controller, and it works pretty well, except for playing the ocarina. On the original controller, you play the ocarina with the C buttons, but on the classic controller, the C buttons are mapped to the right analog stick, which is incredibly sensitive to the touch and makes playing the thing fast almost impossible. Fuck! There's also fishing, which kinda sucks, as you have to do it twice for all the rewards. Once as young Link to get the heart piece, and then again as adult Link to get the golden scale, and it's pretty mind-numbing. I don't understand what makes the fish get away, and it's incredibly frustrating when you've been reeling the bastard in for like 3 whole minutes! Although I guess it perfectly captures the boredom and frustration of real fishing. There's also the Golden Skulltula side quests, where you kill these spiders known as Skulltulas to help weaken a curse placed on this family in Kakariko Village. I do actually really like this quest, as most of them aren't incredibly hard to find, and you get some pretty sweet rewards for collecting more and more of them. But I only recommend collecting half of them, as collecting all 100 is a pain in the ass and doesn't have very good rewards. Collecting all of them requires re-entering dungeons and scrolling every nook and cranny of the map to find these fuckers. After getting the heart piece for collecting 50 of them, they pretty much only give you rupees, and rupees aren't even that valuable in this game. Sorry dude, I know you're scary and all, but I really don't feel like collecting all these. Have fun looking like a deformed spider. There's also a trading quest, which would become a staple of these games, where you get an item, take it to another character in a limited amount of time, and then repeat the process. It doesn't sound very interesting, and it isn't, but at the end you get the big Goron sword, the best sword in the game. Weirdly even better than the Master Sword, as it does twice the damage. The only real issue it has is you need to hold it with 2 hands, meaning you can't use your shield. But I don't give a shit, anything that kills Iron Knuckles this fast is an A-okay in my book. And then there's the Gerudo Training Ground, which is a mini dungeon where you go into different rooms and collect enough keys to get the treasure at the end. It's pretty fun. Most of the rooms are really fun puzzles to solve. It's just the reward at the end kinda sucks. The ice arrows, that sounds awesome! And then you realize that you've practically done everything in the game and there's nothing that takes advantage of what it can do because it's optional. So that leads it to be something I pretty much never ever use other than to fill up the item page. Now before we talk about the dungeons, let's talk about the time.
Sort of like how time is slowly fleeting away from me.
Like I said before, you can switch between child and adult Link by returning and retrieving the Master Sword from its pedestal in the Temple of Time. It's this game's version of the Dark World from A Link to the Past. I do think the Dark World works more as a gameplay mechanic, but I like this version more overall as it shows more insight on the world and its characters. And I still think this game uses time travel in a lot of creative ways, even if it's not very consistent. For instance, there's this guy in Kakariko Village who's upset that a kid 7 years ago played a song that fucked up the windmill and he teaches it to you. But with that, you can go back in time and teach the song to him, making you the kid who's played the song in the first place, creating sort of a time paradox with no beginning. But other aspects follow back to the future logic, like the magic beans where you plant in the past and grow in the future.
So if these things follow the same logic, then shouldn't the beans always be there in the future, even if Link didn't go back? Oh, fuck it, it's a video game.
Alright, let's talk dungeons. The dungeons in Ocarina of Time are pretty damn solid, if a little long. I will admit, they aren't as consistently good as they were in the last game, but the thing I do think they have is more of an identity. The first 3 you complete as Child Link are incredibly simple. In fact, they don't even have small keys, but I still enjoy them a lot. The new 3D space has given these dungeons a strong sense of verticality. I like this puzzle in the first dungeon where you use your force of gravity to break the spiderweb beneath you to progress in the dungeon. I also like how creative they are with their theming, the highlight being the 3rd dungeon, which takes place inside a giant fish. Even if it's kinda gross, everything is pulsing. The dungeons as Adult Link are much more complex, adding small keys and having much more complicated layouts with multiple pathways. The Forest Temple is probably my least favorite, as it goes on a little too long for my taste. And it didn't help that I accidentally reloaded a restore point, meaning I had to complete it twice. Even aside from that, I love the atmosphere and the chilling music that makes this place feel very foreboding. The Fire Temple is in the same vein. I do like it more than the Forest Temple, even if I find sitting through what these Gorons have to say is a little annoying. It makes good use of the different rooms, but I don't think the atmosphere is as good as it was in the Forest Temple, even if it is more enjoyable to travel through. And the hammer is probably the most useless dungeon item in the game. The Water Temple! One of the most infamous levels in gaming. Personally, I don't even think it's that bad. The biggest issue comes with the iron boots, which you can only equip by going into the menu, slowing down the pace of the dungeon dramatically, which thank God the 3DS version fixed. And it's kind of annoying that the only weapon Link can use underwater is the hook shot. Other than that, it's just kind of confusing. I've had to play through this dungeon a good number of times, and I still somehow managed to forget a key and make me have to backtrack to get it. But it's still a solid dungeon, and it's probably the best one so far, as long as you play it on the 3DS. The Shadow Temple. I love this dungeon. It is very linear, which some people might not like, and I get that, but this place's atmosphere is just unmatched. It's so foreboding and creepy and has another one of those terrifying monsters. Oh god, please help me. The only flaw is the hover boots, which have the same problem as the iron boots, just not as bad, as you can still walk around with them on, but they should have just been mapped to the item buttons. And then there's my favorite dungeon, the Spirit Temple. It's the only dungeon in the game that makes use of the time travel, as you complete the first half as Child Link, and then the second half as Adult Link. I love the look and feel, and it's really fun to travel through. It's just that getting to it is a pain in the ass. You have to go through this stealth section to rescue 3 carpenters, and the hallways are so cramped it took me over half an hour just to get through it. I just wish I could see what I'm doing. And every time you get caught, they imprison you, making you have to do it all over again. It's a real pain in the ass. But overall, the Spirit Temple is the best temple in the game, and I love completing it. And then there's the bosses, who are pretty hit or miss. I really enjoyed Bongo Bongo because it's the only boss who you don't use the dungeon item to fight. Instead, you use the Eye of Truth and the bow, and it's a really fun fight. Phantom Ganon is easily the best dungeon boss because of how creative the fight is. You have to watch the paintings to see which one he comes out of and hit him when he does. And in the second phase, you play some good old energy tennis. Other than that, most of the other ones are pretty damn easy. You hit him with the dungeon item, attack them with your sword, and 3 times later you're done. None of them are bad and are pretty fun to fight, but they just aren't as good as Bongo Bongo or Phantom Ganon.
Back to the story!
So after freeing the last sage from the temple, Link travels back to the Temple of Time and meets back up with Sheik, who reveals to be Princess Zelda all along like I said before. She shares a heartfelt talk about what happened after Link pulled out the Master Sword and planned to take Ganondorf down, as she presents Link with the light arrows as they are the key to defeating him. But then Ganondorf captures her and brings her back to his castle to retrieve the Triforce of Wisdom.
You know, Zelda, maybe you shouldn't have taken off that disguise like 2 feet away from Ganon's castle.
Ganon's castle is probably my favorite final dungeon in the series so far. It uses the themes from all the previous temples to make something with a great sense of finality to it. And it's in here you obtain the last upgrade being the Golden Gauntlets, which allow you to lift ginormous rocks with relative ease. Really makes you wonder though why he still struggles to push small blocks afterwards. I love the lead up to the final boss. You ascend a long staircase listening to an organ get louder and louder, and you reach the top and you finally confront Ganondorf and the fight is... alright. It's another game of energy tennis, except you can't lock onto him, but for some reason you can use your empty bottle to reflect the energy instead of the sword, and is something that is in every single Zelda game going forward, and it makes me so happy. But after he goes down, the tower starts to crumble, and you escape with Princess Zelda. And just when you think you're in the clear, Ganondorf uses his last breath to use the Triforce of Power to transform him into his ultimate form, simply titled Ganon. And this right here is my favorite final boss in the entire series. I love how intimidating he feels, even when you've already fought bigger foes in the game, but it just doesn't matter. The music and atmosphere are just incredible, even if he still is pretty easy. Like, if you got every heart piece, the double defense upgrade, and a fairy in a bottle, you're not losing this fight. But after duking it out long enough, Zelda uses her power to hold back Ganon long enough for Link to stab him in the fucking face. The sages then use their power to seal Ganondorf away in the Sacred Realm, finally ending his reign of terror across the land. Link has one final talk with Zelda where she apologizes for everything that has happened and uses the Ocarina of Time to send Link back in time to relive his lost childhood.
Oh yeah, the Ocarina of Time. I kind of forgot about that thing.
Link, now in his original time, goes back to see a young Princess Zelda, presumably to warn her about Ganondorf so he can be arrested before he can do anything. And just like that, the game ends. Sorry if this video wasn't as funny as you might have hoped, but I really wanted to give this game the time and passion it deserves, because I do really love this game. The world, the characters, the side quests, the dungeons, I just love everything about this game, even with all of its faults. Some people might say this game hasn't aged well, and you might be right in some sense. But god damn it, the fact that the game still holds up after 23 years and after being the first of its kind in so many different ways is incredible even on its own. And it still manages to do things that I don't think any other Zelda game has replicated since. Even with how much they try, it's still got flaws, and I still wouldn't call it the greatest game of all time or anything. But I still adore this game and had a great time revisiting it. But if you're gonna play it today, I think you're better off playing the 3DS remake. It's got better textures, a higher frame rate, gameplay fixes like the iron boost and gyroscope aiming. The only thing I don't like is them censoring out things like blood and brightening up areas that used to be moody and dark. But hey, you don't have to use this thing anymore, so that's a win in my book. This is definitely the definitive way to play Ocarina of Time if you haven't already, but playing the N64 version isn't bad either, so pick your poison.
But thank you everybody so much for watching. If you excuse me, I have to go.